I think the purpose of the role of government goes back obviously to our founding fathers, but I think it goes back further than a lot of people consider. The Declaration of Independence is what started it all. And the Declaration says that we believe that we are endowed by our creators with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We were given rights by God. We weren't given these rights by a king, they weren't given these rights by a community, they were given to us by God. But shortly after that, as the Confederation of States really didn't function well, they realized that we need a government who can protect these rights. Of course, our founders, their great fear was the government would take too much power. And so the Constitution was created in order to limit the power of the government. When the government takes too much power from the people, we are willing to surrender some of these rights. We willingly give up some things to the government in order that it can then protect these fundamental rights we have, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But our great fear is that the government takes too much of those rights, or takes too much power. And that's why we have the Constitution. So the purpose of the government is actually to protect these rights of the people. And I think the preamble to the Constitution says it best. We the people, in order to secure a more perfect union, in order to secure greater justice, domestic tranquility, our mutual defense, greater security. Those are the purposes of the government. And of course, that's what this election is about. That's what this great battle that we're seeing now is about. It's about the power of the government versus the power of the people. How much power are we going to give to the government versus how much are we going to retain among the people? And I think most of us feel we have given far too much power to the government over the last generation or so. The federal government, I'm speaking now as an economist, economist in training, also as a small business owner. The federal government cannot create a job. All the federal government can do is take money from the private sector, send it through this machine of bureaucracy, and then at the end of it you come out with some job creation, but it's very, very inefficient. And all we have to look is at the stimulus to see that. By the Obama administration's own numbers, every job that they created cost $278,000. If you look at more conservative numbers, it's probably closer to $700,000. $700,000 per job. The federal government should not be in the business of creating jobs because they're incredibly inefficient at it. Let me explain that a little further if I could, just very quickly. You have to have an agency that taxes the money, takes it out of the private sector, the IRS, it's got its bureaucracy. It goes through a government agency, then they have their bureaucracy and their inefficiencies. Then it goes through this government contracting process. And at the end of the day, you take $1 out of the private sector and you're left with something like 40 cents that's actually spent to enable some type of job creation. And the worst thing is that government's choosing winners and losers. Look at Solyndra, for example. It should not have been funded and wouldn't have been funded in the private sector. The government stepped in and did it, and all we did was waste $500 million trying to create jobs that the government had no business trying to foster in the first place. You know, Will Rogers has a great quote. He said, "The government that robs Peter to pay Paul will always have Paul's vote." And there's a lot of truth in that. And it's a divisive and a negative thing for our country when we have 40% of the people or 47% of the people who don't participate in any federal income tax. It's inefficient for our economy, and you know, honestly, our tax code is extraordinarily inefficient. It rewards those who have the resources to hire accountants and lawyers to go into severe tax avoidance so they don't pay taxes. And you know, normal guys who don't make a lot of money, guys like you and me, we're just kind of part of the machine, and we do the best we can, but we end up paying, you know, money that hurts us. I think the answer is this: we need to go to a flatter, more efficient tax system. And that's one of the things we proposed in our 7 solutions. That is, why don't we have a 10, 15, and a 25% tax rate? And let's get rid of all the loopholes. Let's get rid of all these regulations that allow people to avoid taxes like they do. I would propose exemptions for 2 things. For charitable giving, because I think that private charities do it far more efficiently than government does, and for home mortgage, a single home mortgage, because owning your own home is part of the American dream. Other than that, you should be able to fill out your taxes on the back of a postcard if you want to. I also think we need to to cap our tax revenue to something like 18.5% of our gross domestic product. That's historically what our government has lived off. We're way, way beyond that now over the last 3 to 4 years. And a more simplified tax code would allow us to peg that so that the government doesn't spend as much money. I don't think he can deal with one element of it, and that element being the illegal immigrants who enter the country and break law without looking at immigration reform on the whole. But to answer the question simply, if anyone enters this country illegally, and if they break further laws by identity theft or by any other fraud, they should be punished. It's just that simple. They should be punished. If you and I did that, we would expect that we'd be punished for it, and I think they should as well. But I think the bigger picture is illegal immigration is a problem that has the potential to fundamentally change our country. And it's something that we have to deal with, and deal with in, I think, a fairly comprehensive manner. Secure our borders. Enforce the laws, as we've talked about here. Enforce the laws as they currently exist. We have to, if someone enters the country illegally and they would like to become a citizen of this nation, they should have to go back to their country of origin and go through the same process that anyone else would. We can't provide a pathway for citizenship for those who enter the country illegally. It's immoral for us to think that those who enter the country illegally, we're going to let them skip ahead of the line from all these other people who are going through the process as they should. Sometimes it takes between 3.5 and 5 years for someone to come into the country legally. How can we argue then that those who come illegally should be able to jump to the front of the line for those people who are playing by the rules? I love this question. Part of the reason I love this question is because one of the things my company does is we help the private energy sector to develop energy resources around the United States. We help them work with the government, getting through this labyrinth of government laws and regulations in order so that they can extract energy from the earth. And the first thing we need to do is drill, baby, drill. I love that saying, and it's the truth. And we're seeing some of that up in the Bakken fields in Dakotas, the Marseilles up in the Pennsylvanias. You're seeing fracking and other technologies, the horizontal drilling or directional drilling, that's allowed us to exploit resources there that a few years ago we couldn't. We need to continue down that path. We also need to look at nuclear energy. We also need to look at some forms of alternative energy, but to think that the alternative energy is going to be the thing that saves us here is just simply not true. We're a generation or more from alternative energy having a significant impact on our energy resources. And not only that, this is important to note, the government in many ways hinders us as we're trying to become more energy independent. And again, having worked with them and through my company, I understand this. I think the purpose of the EPA sometimes, the Department of Energy, is to make it more and more difficult for us to extract energy from the ground, not to help us. And I could give you lots of examples of this, but let me give you one absurd one. It takes at least 5 years from the time a company says there's oil or natural gas here, we want to drill a well. It's at least 5 years to go through the process to drill that well. And if it enters the courts, like many of them do, it's probably closer to 15 years. We can't become energy independent as long as the government is setting up barriers to energy and oil exploration. Okay, you know, cultures or organizations that teach against the idea of American exceptionalism, they're all over. We're surrounded by them. You got the media, obviously, Hollywood, for example. I think the mainstream press does it. Most of Europe does it. And unfortunately, our schools do it too. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about because it's one of the core principles of one of the books that I wrote. This idea of American exceptionalism. We used to take it for granted. We used to teach it in our schools. We used to expect that we as Americans felt that way, and we don't anymore. And you got Noam Chomsky, for example, who's probably one of the most well-quoted teachers in our public schools now, who is stridently anti-American exceptionalism. And the unfortunate thing is our president has become one of the great American apologists rather than an advocate for this idea of American exceptionalism. But you know what I think? I think most of us in our heart know that it's still true. We still know America is that shining light on the hill. We are the best hope given to man, as Abraham Lincoln said. And even though our culture doesn't teach it anymore, in our families we can teach it, and our kids can still know that that's true. Nowhere in the Constitution does it have the phrase separation of church and state. The First Amendment simply says that the government shall not institute or favor, essentially I'm paraphrasing, or favor any given religion. They wanted us to have the moral agency to decide what we believe, to choose our conscience, to choose a religion that reflected our own values. But they never intended for the government to be hostile towards religion. They never intended the federal government to be an enemy towards organized religion, nor to make it as a litmus test. If someone belonged to this religion, they were worthy to be in public office. If someone belonged to this religion, they weren't. The separation of church and state has been, like the Commerce Clause, and like so many other original founders' intentions, has been distorted to the point that our founding fathers would be ashamed of us, I think, with the way we've interpreted it now. Okay, Commerce Clause and Welfare Clause. Let me talk about welfare very quickly because it hasn't been nearly as abused. It's in the preamble, it's in Article 1, Section 8, generally referring to taxes. It's the Commerce Clause that has been abused in a way that our founding fathers would have never envisioned. We have to remember the states at the time of the Constitution were almost like different countries. They had their own currency, they had trade wars, they had their own navies. They often treated European nations more friendly than they treated each other. And the founding fathers recognized there had to be some type of regulation of commerce, the movement of goods and services. But what they didn't envision was the courts in the 1930s and 40s turning this Commerce Clause into this thing that could control virtually any part of our lives. A court case in 1942 where they said that a farmer could not grow his own wheat for his own consumption and for his own cows. One of the turning points for it. But now we've got, of course, Obamacare, where the federal government has said, if you are alive and living in the United States, by the fact that you're breathing, then you are engaging in commerce, or you will, and we're going to regulate you and force you to participate in a commercial enterprise with a private entity. And you know, there's just so many examples of how this wide reach of the Commerce Clause, interpretation of the Commerce Clause, has affected, or potentially could affect, virtually every part of our lives. It's not what our founding fathers intended.